Hanging with Higgins, where author and former prosecutor John J Higgins interviews his intriguing guests about their lives, knowledge, experiences, and projects. Explore, learn, and be entertained. Come, join us now. Good evening. Welcome to Hanging with Higgins. I'm John Higgins. I'm your host, and we're going to have a show tonight with a friend of mine, Tim Sullivan. I've known Tim for roughly 20 years now. And as I promised the listeners, I'm going to bring on interesting people who have a variety of backgrounds and interesting tales from their lives. And Tim, and when I met him, he was working for U.S. Senator Bill Bradley in New Jersey, and then he went off into public relations work. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to let Tim tell you about his life. Welcome,
okay.
Tim.
Thank you. Good to see you, John. Let's get together separately when we're not on the air, because I don't see you enough. When you're friends for 20 years, all of a sudden all this time goes by. I worked for Bradley when I met you. That seems like a lifetime ago.
Uh-huh.
I went off to Johnson & Johnson for graduate school fellowship work and went into their PR department. Didn't know what it was. Didn't plan on it. Wanted to be a journalist. And I got offered a fellowship, and the only thing I understood about it was I wouldn't have to move home with my parents. So I took it and walked in the first day really not knowing what to think. And I studied crisis management there, and that was what I did my graduate work on. And I was really interested in the Exxon Valdez, and so I went up to Alaska and studied that whole situation and did some freelance work. But at J&J, I was in the department that had handled the original Tylenol crisis, and got probably the best education in reputation management and crisis remediation that anybody could ever ask for. And we were joking before, I said I thought that everybody would be as authentic and as wonderful and as genuine as the guys that I worked with, and that's, of course, not the case. And then did 20 years of PR and crisis work after that.
Well, since you brought up Johnson & Johnson, not everybody may know what their crisis was at the time. Maybe you could explain a little bit of what happened.
Yeah, sure. So in 1981, somebody decided to use Tylenol as a murder weapon and put cyanide in the capsules. And very tragically, 7 people lost their lives out in the Chicago area. And it was without precedent, because these were people who simply bought this product on the shelves. And the next thing, there were multiple murders. And what had to happen was it had to be pulled off the shelves nationally, and Johnson & Johnson's solution was to invent tamper-resistant packaging. So every time you struggle with a prescription bottle, and every time you can't get a package open, or you have those blister packs that are super sealed, that's all an outgrowth of that original tragic case. More importantly, J&J spoke with its customers, and its CEO provided leadership that showed a grieving nation that they did care, that corporations were in fact people, that they cared about their customers, that they had a soul, which, coming off the Ford Pinto case of the 70s, was antithetical to the big corporate reputation at the time. So they really stood out. They make healthcare products. You have to trust them. You know, you're literally trusting them with your lives when you buy their stuff. And it really became the example and the watermark and the benchmark for all crises that any organization would undergo. And they came up with the mantra, which I have told all my clients, which I tell all my colleagues now, which is tell the truth, tell it fast, and take responsibility. And if you stick to those 3 principles, at some point, maybe not in the immediate future, you will restore confidence in your customers or your audience or your constituents, and things will be okay. But if you deviate from any one of those 3 principles, you will make the situation worse and maybe irreparable.
Right. We've had a lot of that in the last number of years, too, with corporations having one end of problems after the other, right? Ford, again, is back in the mix, and GM with
you would think Ford would have learned their lesson, and the other car companies as well, but it seems that they're still working to get it right.
Right. The profit calculation or the cost-benefit calculation on what they do.
I don't think it's actually cost or the profits. That's an easy scapegoat.
Okay.
There's a principle at work, which is people not wanting to take responsibility. And it's for a corporation to say that they did something wrong involves an act of humility, which is not a quality that makes you a good manager. So when you have a CEO and they have the opportunity to make things right, they can do everything except admit they were wrong. They're up and down with profits, so actual financial losses is not something that's frightening to a big company. But saying that you screwed up is more terrifying than anything that you could post as a gain or a loss. And having advised people and worked directly with them and having said, if you say this, they'll forgive you, they're not capable of that. It's like a built-in mechanism where they're hardwired not to do that. It's one of the reasons they're successful.
Well, that's not only in private industry. I was in government, and let me tell you, people were ducking and weaving as much as they can if something went south. If it went correctly, they wanted to take credit for it. If it went badly, they didn't know anything. Then it was the poor guy who was signing off someplace along the line who didn't know what was going on, basically, that ended up holding the bag.
Right.
There. So I wanted to go back for a second. When you worked for Bill Bradley, what was it like being staff to a U.S. Senator?
Well, it was really exciting. It was the year NAFTA was passed and the GATT treaty, and it was Clinton's first term, and it was Clinton's first budget, and it was when the soldiers in Somalia tragically had been killed and dragged through the streets, and it was right during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was gays in the military. So I worked all those legislative issues. It was also the passage of the Shea Act, which took vitamins and supplements out of the purview of the FDA. Which at the time didn't seem like a big deal, but it has enormous bearing on my life right now. And my career. It was the best thing that could have happened to me because I realized I didn't want to work in politics. And I got to see firsthand the power of labor unions and the power of interest groups. And Bill Bradley was a great guy. He was great to work for. He was a polite person. He was an intellectual. He had good staff. So I like to say I was under the best of circumstances, and I still didn't want to do that as a career, because it just doesn't get any better than that as far as being in a political office. It was nice to be where the action was, but I just didn't see myself. I didn't have the stomach for it, and I don't have any problem admitting that.
Well, as you know, I worked for the governor's office in New Jersey prior to that, and again, we had a Governor, Tom Kean, who was a gentleman as well, contrary to who we have in power today, which I can't imagine how Tom Kean or any other governor I worked for would have been so rude to a lot of people. But having been around the legislative process myself, because we were doing the Governor's Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse back in the day, by the time I was done, I wanted nothing to do with the drug and alcohol issue. I wanted to go work on something else, because it really will burn you out. Right. So, after J&J, then where did you go?
I went to Catholic Charities for 4 years, and I took a right turn because I was in this, Fortune 50 blue chip company, and I thought maybe a stint in social service will work. And Catholic Charities is homeless shelters and psychiatric services and addiction services, which were becoming really important to me at that time in my life. And it was in Newark, so it was like more than 250 programs, and it was absolutely not a dull day. There was so much going on. It was during welfare reform under Clinton in 96, and so we lobbied against that. And it was the immigration amnesty, which everyone forgets, and a lot of immigration reform that happened in the 90s. And it was the closure of the Ryan White AIDS money, which was going to no longer be available after it was sanctioned in the 80s. And I learned a lot about behavioral health. I learned a lot about inpatient psych, which we had a unit in the building that I worked. I learned a lot about homelessness. We had 51 homeless shelters that served real niche populations. We served the container people who live in shipping containers in Port Elizabeth and have communities and tenant leaders. There's a community of vets from Laos and Cambodia who were Special Forces U.S. soldiers. They live in Jersey City in the parallel tunnel to the Holland Tunnel. And each of these populations require very specific, sensitive outreach. And we were designing programs for all of them. The big issue when I was there, and ultimately what made me leave in utter disgust, and I have no problem saying this, is the clean needles for HIV. There was a discussion to provide clean syringes to stop the spread of AIDS among heroin addicts. and it had been successful in some states, and some Catholic Charities programs had adopted it in earnest. And it became a point where you could probably get someone into treatment. If they were a heroin addict and they were trusting you to give them a clean syringe, maybe that was a point of care. Maybe eventually they could get off drugs. And our Archbishop at the time, which was Theodore McCarrick, called it the evil of addiction and a moral issue, and felt that we would be sanctioning bad behavior. And Governor Whitman asked him not to instigate the needle exchange program, and he said no. And I realized people were going to die because of what was essentially a propagandized myth. And you and I had many conversations about that at the time. And it infuriated me, and I literally took a job across the street to get out of there. Right. And so that was. It's not the first time the church has misstepped.
Yes, obviously.
I think one of the things that you said to me when I was spouting up at how angry I was, I said, "These are the people who put Galileo under house arrest." So, and so I left. It was the late '90s, and it was very easy to get a job, and so I took this little temporary job, and I immediately put my resume back on Monster, and I was just going on interviews. I was taking sick day after sick day, and the economy was booming. It was '99,
right?
And you could have 3 jobs if you wanted. It said communications on my resume. Satellite companies were calling, and they were saying, "We need you." And I said, "I'm not an engineer." And they said, "We'll train you." I mean, it was that bizarre. Another conversation I recall is I drove down to Philadelphia for a job interview with American Standard, and by the time I got home, there was a message on my machine offering me the job. There were no cell phones yet. And it was really lucrative. It was a lot of money. And you sat me down and you said, "Tim, it's toilets." So I kept looking. And I really wanted music. And so I chose a firm that had a music division. And they asked me to run their healthcare division. And I said, "I'll do that if I can have some music projects."
Right.
Okay.
For those who don't know, the lights just blinked off and on. So a little bit on the strange side. So after you took the job with that, what were you? Because you were working for St. Vincent's Hospital there for a while.
Yeah. Well, the first thing. So I went to this firm. They had all different types of clients, and they asked me to run the healthcare division. But I got everything. So one of the first clients I had, it was so funny because they called me. They said, "You have nonprofit experience, right?" I said, "Yeah, but I don't want to do that anymore." They said, No, we have this project with the UN. I said, I don't want to go to the meeting. I don't care. And they said, no, you're going to like this. I said, I don't want to do nonprofit. And they said, well, it's Adopt a Minefield, and Paul McCartney is launching this program. I said, what time's the meeting? And I went down and I got assigned to launch Adopt a Minefield, which he was doing with then girlfriend, later wife, then ex-wife, now pariah, Heather Mills. And they were going to take out landmines from mine-affected countries. And to kick it off, it was a series of fundraising concerts. And so in a very casual way, I sat there with Kofi Annan and the ambassador to the UN. UN has different organizations in different countries called the UNAs.
Okay.
Ambassador Bill Loers, and they said, okay, Mr. McCartney wants X, Y, and Z, and the next thing I know, there we are. And for the next year, we did that, and we did concerts with Paul Simon. It blew my mind. Since then I've worked with a lot of celebrities, but this was one where my knees got weak. This was one where I was completely speechless. The thing that, I'm a musician, and he's one of the reasons I'm a musician. So to have somebody that impacted your life that much is a really big deal. And the other thing was he was so disarmingly nice and down to earth and courteous and real and approachable. And, I remember we were at one of the times we were going to have a press conference, and I'd written some remarks for him, and he said, "Can I see the remarks?" I said, "Sure." And he just kind of made some edits and handed them back and said thank you. And it was just like the guy in the office next. This is the guy who changed the world, right? Shaped our pop culture,
right?
And he treated everyone with respect. And then, of course, to see the music was just awesome. He was working on the album Driving Rain at the time, and I'd never been to Los Angeles, so we flew out to do Larry King, and Larry King had never interviewed him. So we get there, and I land in Los Angeles, and I get out of the car at the studio, and he's standing there, and I look, and there's the Hollywood sign, and I'd never seen it. And I was mesmerized, and I was just like, that's the real Hollywood sign from the pictures, and I'm here with Paul McCartney and Larry King, and it was such overload. And I was getting married that week, that Saturday. It was like, everything that could possibly happen in my life was happening. And it was great. It was just, and then the last time that I saw him was September 10th, and we did the Today Show with Heather Mills, and she was a guest. And we said goodbye, and we were going to continue, and the next day was September 11th.
Yeah.
And I was on staff at St. Vincent's Hospital. They were a client. I was going there for an unrelated meeting when the planes hit.
Right.
And then I spent the next 5 days there. And that became the central point of information. It was a trauma unit, so we took a lot of wounded.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
Well, maybe you could talk a little about 9/11, because most people in the rest of the country certainly don't have the same effect of what happened here in the New York City area.
Well, first of all, I got engaged to my wife on the top of the Twin Towers.
Oh.
And it was funny because I thought if I always wanted them to remind her of that romantic moment. And if we got divorced, she'd be forced to look at them the rest of her life. And I was wrong on both accounts. And it was a real lesson in the impermanence of things. But the day that we got engaged, I couldn't get through the metal detector with the ring. Okay. And the security guard stopped me, and I whispered to one of them, and I said, I have an engagement ring.
Right.
And she goes, well, you come over here and you show me.
Right.
And then she called the other guards, and they wished me luck and everything. I went up, I proposed, So I got out of the train, and I remember I stepped onto 7th Avenue, and I was going to go down to St. Vincent's, and there were sirens, but it was louder than any siren. It was like every siren in the city was on. My cell phone rang, and it was my wife, and she said, I just heard that a plane hit the World Trade Center.
Right.
Now, I had covered the 93 bombings at the student newspaper at Rutgers, and I
Right.
had gone right up to the media line, and I did plenty of follow-up pieces, and I knew their structure, and I'd spoken to engineers, and and I said to Megan, oh, yeah, well, it was probably a small plane, because a big one won't go off course,
Right.
and they won't come down, because they're built to withstand that.
Right.
And I said, I can see it in a minute, let me turn the corner.
Right.
And then I saw the flames.
Right.
And I said, actually, that looks pretty big, hon. This is going to be pretty bad.
Right.
She said, okay, be careful. I said, all right. And as I hung up, the second plane hit. And the building looked like it just exploded. I didn't realize it was a plane until a cab driver told me.
Right.
And so I was in front of St. Vincent's. They had already taken stretchers and chairs out in the street, expecting to receive a lot of wounded. And I called the office. I said, just send me everybody. We got to set up a press perimeter.
Right.
And so we did. We got police stanchions, and we needed to clear the street, and we immediately set up an area for the media. And then the first building came down. And then we knew it was just a matter of time before the second one
came.
And when the first one fell, I didn't know what I was seeing. I just saw smoke on the ground, and it took me a while to realize that it had come down. And then when the second one came down, I was anticipating it. And it was a paralysis of fear and just despair. It was more despair. And the fighter jets came roaring in over our heads, and I remember that sound too. It was louder than any sound I'd ever heard, and it felt like you could touch them. They were so low, and they were coming in to defend the island of Manhattan, and you've never seen a fighter jet in attack mode, and that's what we were seeing, and it was just absolutely terrible.
Right.
And then I took media calls. I did 6,000 inquiries over the next week. I was 24/7 in the comm office, and we didn't get any wounded. We got firemen with eye abrasions. We got a couple people with back injuries, but we didn't get any people that were pulled from the rubble.
Right.
And for a couple of days, we didn't know how many died. We were anticipating the worst. That afternoon, the mayor showed up, and I remember he walked up to me and he said, "Thank you for everything." He was still covered with ash. Pataki was with him, the governor, and it was just such an awful time. I remember calling you and you saying, we got a lot of smart people in this country,
Right.
and it's going to be okay. I remember going home like a week and a half later and thinking, and just like sitting and just crying uncontrollably for an hour or so, just because I had to just sit and process what had happened. And then, that became the focal point of our lives for the next 2 or 3 years. My wife wound up running the recovery grant for New Jersey. I had all kinds of clients that were peripherally, attached to 9/11 in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that day I was actually in Atlantic City. We were doing a bias or a bias crime kind of, seminar teaching thing. I had the sheriff actually from the county that the Pentagon was in. I had him come up. He was on one of my panels. And that morning we're all sitting listening to Dunbar had been the head of the state police. He was giving a speech. It was the beeper days. And all of a sudden the beeper goes off, another beeper goes off. And we're all sitting there, all these beepers are going off, trying to figure out what's going on. And it was my sister for me, and she said to me, a plane hit. And I go, well, I wouldn't worry about it too much, Chris, because there was actually a World War II bomber hit the Empire State Building.
I said the same thing. I knew all about the case.
And it still stood and all of that. And then later on, when the other plane hit, then it was like, oh my God. And the weird thing was the night I had stayed there the couple of days, and the Miss America pageant was going on there. That's why my sister was worried about me being down there, because she thought that could be a target. I said, they're not going after Miss America. But it dawned on me that that night on the news, I had seen that bin Laden had assassinated the head of the Northern coalition against him by sending a news reporter in with a camera, and they blew up or whatever. And I kind of knew about bin Laden because he was always in the background, because actually I brought over Israeli commandos after the first World Trade Center bombing to train our state police in counterterrorism stuff. So, we were always open for that. And, unfortunately, we paid the price for that. Well, so you stayed there that whole week, and then you finally got home?
Yeah, I got home, and then it was just a long... I didn't feel... Whatever normal is, I didn't feel normal for a long, long, long time.
Right. Well, we're still running around with the after effects of that. Yeah. Anybody going into an airport today?
Yeah.
I know. It's one of the reasons I always admired the Israelis. The Israelis are very efficient in these kinds of things. They don't.
Right. They're very practical.
They don't screen everybody.
Right.
They screen the people who need to be screened. Mm-hmm. They actually had facial recognition software well before even let it be known they had it. So they were always scanning everybody walking through the airport. So when they see somebody on one of their lists, they just pluck them to the side.
Right.
So, well, let's get back to your PR stuff. Actually, after you did like Paul McCartney, you've done a whole bunch of other celebrities, because I see the pictures of you with them. So
yeah, that's my favorite one up there.
Oh yeah.
So I did. We had a big music division at the firm, and we did major label work. Clive Davis was a client, all the big ones. But I was running the health division, so the labels wouldn't touch me, right?
Okay.
And they wanted people that's all they did. But every celebrity or every band always had some kind of cause, or they had some kind of campaign or effort, and that's what I would get. So that was great. So I did. Paul McCartney was Adopt a Minefield, but I did a breast cancer project with Heart, and we did a bunch of dates. We did the same Revlon breast cancer with Stevie Nicks and Sheryl Crow, and then Bon Jovi was the next year. I did the Mac AIDS Fund with Little Kim and Lisa Marie Presley and Pam Anderson and everybody, and then we did a heart disease campaign with Pfizer, and we had the Doobie Brothers headline, and a bunch of baby bands, and then after a number of years, then many of these involved massive events. I did the largest gathering for immigrant rights in America in Flushing Meadow Park. We had 150,000 people. Wyclef Jean was the headliner. Cardinal O'Connor spoke. Cardinal Egan, sorry. And if you want a great PR story, the audience was going to be mostly Mexican, and we had the biggest band in Mexico playing. Their name was Bronco. And I had the Cardinal in between Bronco and Wyclef Jean, right? Which was crazy, but this was going to work, right?
Right.
And so the Friday before the concert, which was a Saturday, the Pope goes into the hospital and needs an emergency tracheotomy. And he's like going to die. Right. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I'm going to have the head of the U.S. Church in a place with an entirely Catholic audience, and the Pope might drop dead in the middle of my concert.
Right.
So I went and I got B-roll of the Pope, and I basically prepared a memoriam if he had to lead the audience in prayer. And I showed up the next day, and I briefed the diocesan spokesperson, and he looks at me and goes, why, what are you doing? I said, this is a papal death contingency plan, and every good PR guy has to have one.
Uh-huh.
And I remember the looks at the table. I'm like, what are we going to do if the Pope dies?
That's right.
But that's what you do. It's everything from do the speaker's work to, what if the Pope dies?
Right.
And everything in between. You do everything but sing. Right? So we did a lot of music. It was great. This is, I dug this out. This is my favorite. So Richard Branson brought Virgin Fest to America.
Wow.
And I did the Who and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and the Raconteurs and the Flaming Lips. They were all on the bill down in Pimlico Racetrack in Baltimore. And it was the first time there was a concert there. They wouldn't let him get a permit in New York because they didn't want him to compete with all the local events. And the story that I have there is we went down 2 weeks early. We're building the stage. And while we were building and getting this event ready, we were expecting 100,000 people. We're building a rave tent. We're building all this crazy stuff. The horses still had to run the track, right? And so every time we did anything, the horses would freak out, right?
Uh-huh.
We're testing pyrotechnics. We're testing glow sticks. We're testing smoke machines. And the ownership of the racetrack were 80-year-old white guys, and they needed the money because the track was, but they didn't like what was going on.
Right.
So probably the Friday before, they said, you know what, we're going to pull the contract, and we really don't want this to happen. We just don't think that this is the right decision, and whatever the hit is, financially we'll take it, but let's back out of this. And so it was a really tense meeting, and it was one of these things where we just couldn't let them cancel, and we went around and around 3 hours. I made this impassioned speech that not one blade of grass was going to get harmed, and everything was going to be fine, and we had the right insurance riders, and I personally guaranteed it. And I thought I had persuaded them, and the second I stopped speaking, the windows started shaking, and the floor started shaking, and the table started shaking, and there was this sound like the building was going to come down, and it was the Who starting their sound check. And it was the greatest moment, and if you could see the look on these guys' faces of shock and terror, and I just turned around, and there they are on the stage, and they're just wailing away, and I'm just like, this is fantastic.
Right.
And the concert went off without a hitch, and it was spectacular, and it was a real privilege to work. We undersold tickets, whatever. I mean,
That happens.
But it was just a great moment. And then I worked for another band, the Hooters, a little band out of Philadelphia, and they took me on tour in Europe, and
wow,
that was really exciting. They kept saying I couldn't get them arrested here,
Right.
And they kept saying, no, we're big in Europe, and I'm like, whatever.
Right.
And then we go to Europe, and sure enough,
They're
hockey
big.
arenas and 50,000 person shows, and we toured with UB40 and Squeeze and Supertramp, and it was great. It was just really exciting.
Well, I remember seeing Rory Gallagher when I was at the University of Miami in like '73, and I made friends with a guy who had come over from Wiesbaden, Germany. His father had been in the Air Force there. He goes, "Oh, you've got to see this guy. He's a great guitarist. He's whatever." And I mean, I'm probably from, I don't know, 10 feet away from him playing. He goes, "You don't understand. He's playing stadiums over in Europe or whatever." And sure as hell, that's exactly what he was doing. So there's really such a difference between one place and the other.
Yeah.
And the other thing you seem to be saying, and I've always known that to be true, is that when something goes off like really smoothly and whatever, people have no idea how much work goes in behind that to make that happen.
Right.
So it's good to hear somebody who's been on the inside of it, not just the outside of it.
Yeah. The reason that I wanted to do all that work is I am a musician, and so I wanted so much to make music the focal point of my life. But what it taught me is there's just a lot of outside work. What I really want to do is write music, and so I don't need all that anymore. Been there, done that, done the biggest. But just writing songs is really more pleasurable than any of that ever was.
Right. Well, I remember conversations with you that, my God, all I want to do is work with bands and all of this stuff. And now look, what you thought going off in one direction just opened up doors in a whole other.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, since you have all this background in PR, because I know I have a lot of people who follow me who are other authors, And I know that they don't have a clue of what public relations is, how it works, what they should be looking for, what they should be trying to do for themselves. Because it looks to me the way the whole book and writing industry has gone, the days of the major publishers pushing you and whatever, unless you're already famous, they're really not doing that for most of the authors. So do you have any suggestions and background that you could, give them?
Yeah. So the world has changed so much since I'm in the business. And what gives people a lot of street cred now is their social media footprint. And if I'm an editor or I'm a programmer and I'm deciding what source to put on in an interview, I'm going to pick the guy with 100,000 Twitter followers.
Right.
And I'm going to pick the guy with the 100,000 Facebook friends. And that's going to be why that person holds credibility. Whether that's true or not is a completely different conversation. Uh-huh. But it absolves me as an editor when I have to defend why I have a certain source on.
Right.
So the best thing that you could do is build up your social media army by any means necessary.
Okay.
And then get as much material out there as you can. The great thing about the internet is that you can self-publish. You can have a blog. You can be out there every day. And you don't have to promote it. It will be found for you. It comes up in searches and everything. And so if you're saying something unique, you'll be found.
Okay.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my saying is to people is that you are in everybody's living room.
Yeah.
The problem is everybody else is in everybody's living room.
Right.
So you've got to get yourself to appear up outside of the clutter so that they can see, who you are and what you have.
Right.
So, it's and I guess that applies to the music industry as well today.
It's the best time in the world to be an independent musician.
Uh-huh.
Because you don't have. First of all, it's really cheap to record. So I just made an album and. The cost was not prohibitive. It used to be a fortune. When I started playing, it was really expensive, and nobody could afford it. You had to save and save and save just to get a song done. It's easier. You have all these tools. When we write and record, half of it gets done right here in this room before we bring it into the studio. So it's all loaded up and ready to go, and we just have less work to do.
Right.
And it's I have an album on iTunes. I have worldwide distribution right now.
Uh-huh.
My bandmate and I wrote music, and anyone in the world can hear it. And there is no middleman. There is no barrier. Now, there's no one marketing it, and so we have to work our tails off to get people to hear it.
Right.
And find all kinds of ways. But if someone in Singapore wanted to hear one of my songs right now, all they have to do is click.
That's right.
Which is great, which means every time we have a gig, if people want to buy the disc, all 10 of those dollars go in our pocket.
That's right.
Not just one. Chuck Berry used to say, there's 57 other pennies in a 58-cent 45. Where do they go?
Right.
Well, those days are over. So that's exciting. But I just have more tools. I can look up on the internet anything I need.
Right.
I have unlimited instructions. If my bandmate, who's a very sophisticated musician, throws some crazy chord at me, I can cheat on my iPad mid-show. I can look and there it is, and boom, I can play it.
Right.
It's a very exciting time, and it's a really fun time to be a musician.
Right. Well, I know when I was a teenager growing up, there was a guy. Actually, he was a young guy, Dave Dominich. I should have him on someday. I think he's partners now with Lenny Kravitz. And he was a kid. He was working in a studio in Hillsborough, New Jersey. It was Tony Camillo's, and he did all the engineering work for Gladys Knight and the Pips, and Anne Margaret was down there or whatever. And I remember the studio, oh my God, the board that they had with the equalizers and all of that. It was almost like they were a musician themselves to do that. I'm sure today it doesn't take anywhere near what that set of equipment is. Yeah, it's
this computer behind me.
Yep,
does all that work.
Yeah. So, and then also in the music business, I guess I had a brother-in-law who I don't. You weren't around when I was married to that one. I've been married a few times, and Coley, he had his own band and whatever, and it was all the recording contracts, and the recording contracts were terrible, really, for an artist, because they were really against the artist for the first 5 albums. Mm-hmm. And how many bands ever get beyond the first 5 albums? Right. And they give them an advance. They don't get any money until the advance is all paid back and all of that. So it was a really difficult time.
Yeah.
So now with your band, basically, why don't you start telling me a little bit about that before we break off. I want to have you play your song, one of your songs off your album.
Okay. So, I'm here with the other half of my band. The band is the two of us.
Okay.
Another thing you don't need today is the rest of the band.
Right.
And we've both been in bands long enough to realize that really is a lot of extra work that encumbers you and gets in the way. So we met at a party. Donna is an extraordinary keyboard player and musician, and had spent her life in bands and studying. She was, a prodigy at 6 on piano, and we went to a party. It was Arthur, and he had a band set up, and another mutual friend of ours, Patty, said, "Go up and play." So I just grabbed a guitar and we went up and played, and she was on the keyboards, and it was like great, And so I had formed a band at the show where I work, which was the Dr. Oz show, and he would get up and sing with us and stuff. And so afterwards, Donna said, "I'd really like to play in your Oz band." And I said, No, you're too good.
Okay.
You're too good for us. And she
Too
laughed.
good for Dr. Oz?
Well, we were doing covers. We were doing classic rock covers. And not what I wanted to do, but it was the hand I was dealt at the time. And she called again, and she goes, I really would love to come and play with you guys. And I was like, nah, I don't know. She just kept calling. So I told the guys in the band, I go, look, there's this really good keyboard player. We want one anyway. And, she'll come and play with us, but you guys can't, don't be jerks. Don't screw this up, So she came and joined us, and we played, and it was I don't know, a year or whatever, and we did gigs with them. And the whole time we got to talk about what our vision would be.
Right.
And just didn't want to deal with the rest of the band. We wanted to write, and not everybody at this point wants to write. A lot of people leave that, and not everyone that's a musician is a writer.
Right.
A lot of them are just play. So we just kept talking, and we just said, let's just break off and form our own band, but we make all decisions. Right. Like a king and a queen, what we say is the law of the land. We don't want a democracy, we don't want to deal with it, and it's going to be like a monarchy.
Right.
And she said that should be our name.
Hence the name.
Hence the name, the Monarchy, and that's what it is. And so,
wow.
Is that more or less correct?
That's pretty much on, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you're Donna Dior, correct?
Yes, Donna Dior.
Just wanted to make sure we got your name in there.
That's it, thanks.
Before we go to the song, one of the things that's dawning on me, I didn't even talk to you about your work with Dr. Oz.
Right.
I mean, it's...
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny. I never intended for that to happen. Of course, when I started, he wasn't even in television, but I was running the healthcare division. I was representing every hospital in New York,
right,
and medical manufacturers and all this stuff. And I wanted Fuse, the music channel, because everyone thought it was going to be the next MTV.
Right.
So they put me on Fuse, and then Fuse got sent off to some other area of the corporation or sold or something, and I got stuck with AMC, IFC, and WE, these little cable channels that were really tiny at the time.
Right.
And AMC was doing Clint Eastwood specials, and they were catalog. They were back catalog movies. And they said to me one day, we're going to do original programming. And I said, why?
Right.
They said, no, our first show is about a chemistry teacher who gets diagnosed with cancer and he becomes a methamphetamine cook. I go, that's a terrible idea. I said, the age of the anti-hero is over with The Sopranos, and no one's going to like that. Do you know what addiction does? It's terrible.
Right.
So I launched Breaking Bad.
Right. Which, of course, becomes one of the most...
Which, of course, was a hit. So the next year, they sat me down. They said, well, we have another original piece, and it's about advertising executives in the 60s and how women were treated in the workplace, and there's a fashion component, and it's going to be great. I go, that's a terrible idea. Nobody likes period pieces. Nobody's going to wear these dumb clothes. Right. The women's movement is over, and advertising is like inside baseball. So you don't want to do that.
Right.
I launched Mad Men.
Right.
So by complete accident, I was connected to these two hit shows. Okay. I just was in the right place at the right time, and it was against my better judgment. I didn't know what I was doing. So then Oprah Winfrey had Oz on as a regular guest, and she decided to launch his show.
Right.
And it was this combination of healthcare and television.
Right.
And I remember them saying to me, we're going to do an hour-long talk show on health. And this little voice said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And I just said, that's the greatest thing ever.
Right.
And I got the account. And I launched the show. And
Right.
it was a very easy decision to leave the firm and go with him full time, and we start our 6th season in a month, and we've been all over the world, and we run his global brand out of my office, and it's extraordinary. I took the job because I thought if we do things right, people might get some help. They might take some tips and they might get better care.
Right.
And I know that is the result because a lot of people write to us, and we do field clinics, and we have enrollment programs. So people are listening. They don't know what to do with their health, and we try to teach them. So warts and all,
Right.
the whole issue is one that I feel fairly good about. It's not easy. It's very
Well, the
hard.
whole thing with medicine, they always call it practice.
Yeah.
So that's the way I always kind of view that.
And there really is no precedent for us. There's never been anything like us on television.
It's true.
So conventional medicine doesn't always know how to react to us, and
Right.
we go to put things on TV, and we're like, well, how do we do this? Like, it's literally never been done.
Right.
But we just keep going, and at the end of the day, we want to help that viewer find a pathway to care.
Well, I remember
And
that
that's
time
top
you
of
were
mind.
flying over to the Kimmel show with a
With
I guess with a display of
Yeah, well, I brought what's called the Bristol stool chart, and
Right.
we gave it as a gift to Jimmy Kimmel, and it's a chart of how your poop should look, and,
Right.
and we used that as a prop on the set, and it's using humor for a very serious and embarrassing discussion. And
Right.
people don't know that that's a real medical marker. No one wants to talk about it, so we try to create that safe thing on the air.
Yeah.
We call ourselves a no embarrassment zone.
right.
And you need a guy like Kimmel that can riff on it and play with it and be supportive and who genuinely cares. I mean, he's a
Right.
wonderful human being.
Right.
And when we do that, people get better because even though it's funny on TV, the next day it's in your head and you notice something. And
Absolutely.
I've gone all over the country with a sack of brains, like real human brains, never been stopped in the airport. I have a little letter from him that says I can carry them. It means nothing. We made it up.
Right. Right.
But I've had livers and hearts and everything. I did one event where I had 3 entire humans in a suitcase,
Wow.
preserved in formalin, and I
Right.
checked them through luggage, and I got them in Chicago, and I went and did my event. No one ever said a thing.
Wow.
I love that. It's fun. you know?
Yeah. It's different.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do a quick story on my ability to predict the future. In the mid '70s, I'm walking through a mall with my cousin Ruthie, who you've met, and she at that point has become one of the first vice presidents at Home Box Office, and she's going, cable TV, Johnny, it's going to become this big thing. It's all coming. It's on its way. And I looked at her and I said, oh, Ruthie, no one's going to pay to watch television. So you can see how good my predictability was. HBO, Lord knows how much money they make today. So why don't you give us a little bit of an intro for your song,
Okay.
and then we'll do a little break as your song plays.
Okay. So we wanted to write songs that nobody else was writing. We wanted to talk about things that we thought were important to us. And one night we were writing a song, and Donna, in a fit of dramatic explanation, and said, I don't care if it's effing Gandhi, I'm still going to do what I want to do. And we thought it would be really funny if we wrote about Gandhi. And there's that classic party game, if you could have dinner with 5 people from history, who would it be, right?
Right.
And that would always come up at parties I was at, and Gandhi was always on the list. And I thought, what would it really be like? And the thing I realized is he would probably be pretty sad about how things turned out. He would probably be pretty disappointed with what people did with his teachings and his legacy, probably in his home country of India, but certainly around the world. And we could all take a lesson from what he was trying to teach, and I don't know that we're necessarily better off. And that would probably be a very sad conversation. Right. So we wrote Soup with Gandhi, and it's a humorous twist on how he would probably lament the state of the world today. Is that pretty much right?
Yes, yeah.
But why don't you explain a little bit about Gandhi, because I'm not sure everybody's going to know what Gandhi stood for and what his whole approach to
Gandhi,
changing the world was.
Yeah, Gandhi was a very shy person for somebody who led such a public life, and he was very well educated. He was a lawyer. He studied in Britain and was working in South Africa. So by the time he came back to India, which was ruled by the British and struggling for independence, he had already had a really great career. Not a political career, though. And his philosophy was nonviolence, that under any circumstances it was not appropriate to fight, and that nonviolent resistance would teach your captors or your occupiers that you had worth and that you deserved rights and independence. And that worked with the British. They had a peaceful transition of power where they gave India their independence after many years of him leading marches and everything. It was in the 40s, so it was during World War II, so what was very controversial was he also believed in not standing up to Hitler.
Right.
So he wasn't popular with everybody.
Right.
And most people would say there are circumstances when you should fight.
Right.
And he would not sign on to that. And, when the British gave up the occupation of India, Gandhi either was right or got lucky, depending on your point of view.
Okay.
And India became a robust nation and thriving, and it has 13 disparate states that speak different languages, and he unified all that. One of the things he did was a salt march, and it was a tradition that the local Hindus would march to the Ganges River and collect salt that they would then use in their food, and the British didn't want that to happen,
Right.
and he did it anyway, and he peacefully led the salt march.
Okay.
So in the bridge of our song, he sees the salt shaker on the table, and he says, I once walked hundreds of miles just to make a point, and it didn't work out,
Right, right.
Yeah. And I don't know, I hope people hear our songs and then go think about them. I always wanted to know what a song was about when I was a kid.
Right.
Whether it was the Police or Pink Floyd or Rush or Led Zeppelin, I was like, what are they singing about? This is cool.
Yeah.
And I had to know. And I discovered
Absolutely.
Tolkien, and I discovered Arthur C. Clarke, and I discovered all of these things that was important to the writers.
Right. It's another way of communication.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that, we're going to listen to
Soup with Gandhi.
Soup with
by the
Gandhi.
Monarchy.
Monarchy.
Okay, we'll be back.
When he
Okay, we're back with Hanging with Higgins. I've got Tim Sullivan and Donna Dior of the group Monarchy. That was their song Soup with Gandhi. And I'm going to let them talk a little bit more about what is on their album.
Thank you. So that was from our album Decree, which came out this summer on July 21, the anniversary of the moon landing.
Okay.
And Donna and I wrote that record and recorded it in last year from September to May, 2013 to 2014. And the way we work is we will trade files on the computer and then get together and go over them and write parts. And music always first, then words later. And then we'll have a lyric night and we will go over the lyrics. And Donna's really particular about getting the syllables exactly right with the math of the melody.
Well, usually.
Okay.
And I'll write a line that I like, and she'll say, but this is a pickup note, like, you can't do this. And I'll be like, it's a conjunction. It's necessary for the grammar. And we from that, a better product comes out. And then we go in and we record, and it's just the two of us, and our engineer does the rhythm instruments. The album's called Decree.
And we kind of picked up a style.
Donna, why don't you move up a little bit closer? Yeah, I think that might be better for the audio.
We both sing. So most of the songs are a mix of lead vocal, kind of a mix, and a lot of like harmony going on. Reminiscent, I guess, in a way of like maybe Fleetwood Mac, and a little bit vintage in a sense, you know.
We pick things we like about other bands, and we try to say, what did they do? That worked. Let's see if we can do it, while keeping things original. Everybody steals from everybody. Ray Manzarek of the Doors said, "Don't ever let anyone kid you." But we don't steal. We know things worked for other people, so we try to do them. We're a guy-girl duo, and that's the vocal mix that we go for.
Right.
We write about. We have something for everyone on this record. So there's a lot of styles. There's acoustic songs. There's pretty heavy songs. The album leads off with a march, a royal march, and a song "Bow Before Us," which sounds really arrogant, but it's about getting control of your own emotions and how each one of us is really a king or a queen in our own realm if we can just exercise self-control. Okay. And that's a philosophical statement and a personal statement, but we spend a lot of time talking about how we see the world, and that's what comes out in our music. Decree is like it's our statement. It's an edict. It's a non-negotiable philosophical doctrine. Okay. And that's what we wanted to do, and we did that. We have the song Rocket Frog, which sounds spacey, and there really was a frog, and it really did get blasted into space, and it was on the news, and we saw the news story and the picture of the poor frog, and we thought, what was that frog thinking?
Right. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, because I know you explained a little bit more.
It was in September 2013, and there was a launch in Virginia, and we were actually watching the launch on the computer.
Okay.
And the next day, there was all these pictures of this frog that had been blown up by the rocket exhaust. Okay. And was thrown at the camera, and so it became this big story, and everyone was like, ha, 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 there's a frog. It was on CNN, it was everywhere. And we thought, that poor frog. What was that frog thinking? And then I thought, well, let's run with that. I mean, this is a frog who was minding his own business and got the chance to go into space. And, that would be a really good narrative. And so we wrote Rocket Frog, and we used NASA samples. And we thought it would be really cool if real astronaut commentary were in the song. So we used all the classic samples. The eagle has landed, one small step for man. And when you put those in rhythm, they come out great. So it's going to be one of our premiere videos, too. Right. So we shot video for Rocket Frog. And,
from the frog's point of view.
Right, the frogonaut.
Yeah, frogonaut. And frogonaut's in the song. So it's in the chorus. Yeah.
See? Yeah. That's very cool. So how long does it take for you to do your album?
Well, we work really quickly. We got about 2 songs a month done. Wow. But we had January, our engineer was moving studios, so we had a downtime. And then we had another delay. We would have been done in early spring otherwise. We also sidetracked and wrote some music for the Dr. Oz show. Okay. And then we took a commercial assignment. So we did spend other time in the studio on other things outside the scope of the album. But we have a great pattern, We're writing 2 nights a week, and we're in the studio 1 day a week. And for me personally, I mean, I'll let Donna say this, but I need that. I need to know that that's kind of going on, so I can cope with the other challenges of life. It's really something that makes me happy. And one thing that you and I talked about all those years, John, is that when I'm not playing, I'm just not happy. I mean, it's just, that's the hand I'm dealt.
Right. Are you the same way, Donna?
Yeah, pretty much. I've been playing my entire life, and as well as doing other things. Yes, I need to play music to stay sane. So, and I particularly, as well as loving to play, I love to write music. So that, in a sense, regardless of in what genre, or I need to do that. So it's huge in my life.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about writing. When I'm not doing writing for like a novel, I feel like I'm wasting time. It's like I need to be doing that piece of creativity. Do you also find that when you're in the creative process that more stuff comes to you? I'm of the mindset that once you start creating, the pathways all open up and you get a lot of other ideas. I think a lot of people think that once you start creating, you can only create a certain thing. I don't see it that way at all.
Yeah, no, and what we said when we started working together was nothing was off the table.
And it hasn't been.
No, and you'll hear in Soup with Gandhi, you'll hear an Indian rhythm that we sampled to bring in. There's a song with a harpsichord, A Little Hope. There's a progressive song, Rocket Frog is guitar and synth. It's very reminiscent of the progressive bands of the 70s. And nothing is off the table. And what we're a sponge, and what we're hearing is coming out and affecting us.
Right.
So no, there's no limits. There's no niche. There's nothing narrow about the creativity, lyrically, musically, anything.
Right. So you're working on a new album, or
yeah, we're already 2 songs into it.
Good.
When we were done, I was fearful that like many projects, when it was over, then it would be like, okay, see ya. And that's not what happened, and luckily she got the same amount of joy out of it, and I'm just like, I just want to keep going, and let's just keep writing. So we kept writing. I wrote a song for my father who's turning 80, and I wrote a song called Full Circle.
Right.
And it's about the lessons that were important that he taught me, and we're going to go mix that tomorrow night. We've already laid down all the principal recording on that, and I'll give that to him Saturday when he turns 80. And that's the most important thing I can do with my music, is tell someone I love that they're important to me.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we wrote another song for a friend of ours because he's a new father, and we wrote a song about fatherhood and how much he clearly loves his daughter. So
Well, that's the important stuff in life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So he's leaving the next generation.
Yeah.
Everything else we leave turns to dust.
Yeah.
Right. So any other projects you're working on, Donna, outside of this, or?
Not really. No, this has been primarily my project for the last, few years, basically. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably 2+. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and we didn't even as far as continuing from Decree, which was our album that we just put out. We didn't specifically say we're going to start, just writing another one right away, but it just kind of we just kind of continued on.
Good.
Yeah.
And before because we're getting close to the time, maybe you can give us all your website information so that somebody can find you on the internet.
The main website is monarchyband.com. So monarchyband.com. And there you can find pictures and a link to our album on iTunes. It is on iTunes and Amazon and everywhere else. Our Facebook is facebook.com monarchy-rock.
Okay.
So you can get all our updates. You can get all our pictures. We always post pictures of us recording and everything else. And please be our friend, because that way you can keep up to date with us. And our Twitter handle is monarchy2112.
Okay.
And then you can get our tweets. Tweeting is hard. It's new for us. We're really good on Facebook, but the Twitter is new. So
140 characters or less.
Yeah. But you'll enjoy the record, and if you don't, call us.
Good. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time. I have enjoyed having both you, Tim, and Donna. It's been a real pleasure. You can get more information from me. I finally got a better website address for my own Hanging with Higgins site, so it's now www.hangingwithhiggins.com, and then my main website is www.john-j-higgins.com. So that's all for tonight, and thanks for listening. Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.